Hey everybody, welcome once again to Rise the GM, where today we're talking about being pulled back in. We're going to talk about a charming thief, and we're going to talk about the SCRPG, Sentinels Comics. Stick around for that and more with our special guest, Samuel Grant, on Rise the GM. Well, hey guys, it is good to be back with you here again. We have a special guest with us right here in between Adam and myself, Samuel Grant. It is good to see you today. How are you today, Sam?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Sam, we're going to, in a moment, let you tell everything about who you are and what's going on. Actually, maybe we should, I don't know. First, just tell us briefly, who are you, Sam? Why are you here? Why are you here?
Why are we on this planet? No, no, I'm Sam Grant or Samuel Grant, either one. I'm a amateur, getting more experienced, or rising GM.
You're an ascending.
Ascending, that's right. Yeah,
rising, ascending GM.
Ascending, rising. Either way, going up some way. But no, I really love RPGs. We can talk about how I got introduced at some point, but I just like creating those stories and bringing people together and kind of getting to collaborate on stories. It's a lot of fun. So I enjoy it. I enjoy listening to the podcast, and I like to introduce people to new systems. So.
Yeah, and we're going to get a little bit of that today because you're going to talk about something we have alluded to a few times on this podcast, but never really explained. A lot of people come in, they know D&D, they know Pathfinder, and maybe they'll know some of the other fantasy variants and some of the space variants, but they may not know Sentinels Comics RPG. So we're going to talk about that a little later. Before we do, we always have a segment where we just drop it a little encounter starter that you can use in your encounters. And we talk through it a little bit and give you just a little something to spark your imagination. We're going to do that again today. I'm going to start that and read this one, The Enmity of Kinsmen. Oh, no, it's pulled back in, but it's in this section, right? Pulled back in. And so here's what you got. You got a member of a powerful organization. So this could be like a big crime family or some sort of family that's huge. A guild, a secret society, whatever it is. A member of this bears a grudge against one of your PCs, right? So your PC who belongs to the same group or belonged to the same group, or you can determine what that is as you play this. But they hold a grudge against them because of this member's hatred for the PC. No longer does the PC have close ties with this group because of the enmity between these. That was always a hard word for me growing up. I always wanted to say enmity. I don't know. But enmity.
Enmity, yeah.
Enmity.
The extra syllable.
Yeah. Right. While the party is resting, there is an attempt made on a PC's life from a distance. It could be an arrow or a spell or whatever. The attacker, though, can't be found. And a few days later, the attacker tries again. A third attempt follows soon thereafter, but this time it was from more up close. And when the PCs defeat the assassin, there's clues on his body that indicates that he was hired by this PC's foe in this powerful family or guild or whatever it was, this organization. A day or so later, the PCs discover that they're being followed. And this time the pursuer is not an assassin. So when they kind of finally corner this person, maybe they're suspicious. They find out not an assassin, though the PCs will likely suspect that they would be at first. Rather, it's a retainer of a friendly member of that organization who brings word that the organization's leader is in fact dying, and the PC's foe is the most likely candidate for succession. And so if the PC does nothing, the foe is going to become the new leader, and they're going to bring the full power of this organization against the PC, right? And I love, by the way, and I was going to get to this at the end, but I love, by the way, that they're not naming what this organization is. Could be Thieves Guild, could be like Wizards Academy. It could be, you can come up with whatever it is, but they're going to bring the full wrath of that down on the PC if they, in fact, are in charge, leaving no peace for this player character. They're going to constantly be pursued. If the PC opposes the rival as the next leader, then there's going to be this huge power struggle. Okay. So if they decide the choice I'm making is I'm going to try and become the leader myself. In this case, there are several things to consider. Would the PC actually want to lead the organization? How would this affect their adventuring status? If you're tied to this organization, is there another candidate for leader that the PC would maybe support instead and back? And if so, how can the PC best lend support to that character? What would that look like? Or can the foe and the PC actually get together and make a deal of some sort that the foe wins leadership, but then they stop harassing the player character and leave them alone. This plot can be an excellent way, it says here at the end, to open a campaign, as it allows you to begin using elements of one of the PC's background, a couple of elements, the organization and a hated foe, right out of the gate. Seeing this immediate connection between a PC's background and the campaign can help all of your players become more interested in the game, instead of like, you guys all met in a bar and now what do you want to do? Yeah. So what do you guys think of this one as we throw it out there? Like I said, my first thought is I love that they don't tell what this organization is. And so it gives you a lot of leeway for whatever your characters kind of write into their backstory. You can find one who has ties to some organization or family, and then you can begin to manipulate that. But like, what are your thoughts as I read through that? Either one of you.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I think these are more and more successful when they have a lot more open space in them to like make those kind of creative decisions. It kind of answered a question. I was writing down some questions here as you were walking through that, Matthew, and the start of the campaign, I like that idea a lot as far as like tying in, bringing in backstory. A question I had written down before I remembered that was a part of the end was like, is this possible to do as a, not just a start, but also are there things you can do within the game to create this background? Like, which one is better? Was kind of my question I was asking. And I do think they talk about that of being a good way to tie people in. I wonder, like, the ability to do that, like things that have happened, relationships that have been built in the game, and then bringing that in. Do you think that's as easy? I don't know, kind of veering a little bit, but what do you guys think about that as far as tying like relationships that have happened in game into a thing like this?
I hadn't been thinking about relationships that had been made. My first thought was like your first question, is this something you can do in the middle? And I think you can. I think in the Dormant Mind campaign that I've run, I had one of the characters told me that in his little backstory that his dad was a member of the Thieves Guild or something like that. And so I pulled that in later, and his dad, who became named Todd, and everybody's like, "Oh, you're Todd's boy, Todd's boy," and brought in this whole idea of like people began to recognize that he was the son of the previous leader of the Thieves Guild, who was no longer the leader. Now there was another leader, but they he didn't take to it, and the story, the line never went anywhere. He just didn't pursue anything that I threw out as far as, hey, this is a hook for you in the game. You could do something with this organization. And he's just like, okay, yeah, I'm Todd's boy. Anyway, so we go over here, and I'm like, okay, Todd's boy doesn't care about the criminal life. And so he went on his way. But you can do that in the middle. Of course, I didn't make it a hated foe and someone pursuing him. I could have forced that issue more with something like that. But I think you can bring in those sorts of things in the middle of the game. And it is interesting. But it is also a great way to start if people are like, oh, here we are. We're all ready to do an adventure, but we don't know what we're doing or why we're together. And all of a sudden you pull in something like this, and people can begin to like something about opposition solidifies a team. So,
right. Yeah.
But as far as can you find people in the game that have already kind of been in there and tie that in? I think so. Like I've had characters that, again, were just kind of, I need a throwaway character to be, this doorman or this, whatever. And I throw them in there. And then like, because, the reaction between the group and that player went the way it did, I bring them in with a greater role. And you can bring that in as like this person thought you had gone off the face of the earth, but now that you're back, they're they can't rest until you've had yours. Or something. I don't know. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Sam?
What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, I like this one because it's a great way to start in a way that's more personal. I think I like in a D&D game, especially the stories that you're the chosen one, or you're in a prophecy. Sometimes that can be really good, but it can also get a little stale. So I think starting with, hey, someone is after you for a reason, someone from your past. I think that might be a good way to grip players, especially players who might think, oh, well, I've played a lot of D&D. I know we're going to save the world. And it's like, well, not necessarily, And I also, I like, what Matthew pointed out about it not naming the organization. I mean, this could be an artisans guild or a band that a bard was a part of, just whatever you want. But
and think about how that would look. You got
great.
a band member coming after you because he wanted to be the lead singer and you always were.
You got the gig at the festival and he didn't, Yeah. A rival band, I guess. Anyway.
Or if you were part of the Perfumers Guild, it's like, oh man, old Pump.
Yeah.
I can't even think of a name. He's coming after you with his little lemon spritzer.
I can smell him, but I haven't seen him yet. Yeah.
You smell lingering mint in the air, and your nemesis has been here.
Yeah.
I also like in the middle there, like they laid out that, okay, there's lots of ways they could attack this. And so they help you as a GM prepare, okay, what would I do if they decide to, if he decides to run against or to run right against the rival and try and take power. And then I have to ask the questions. How are you going to do this? Or I have to be ready to throw obstacles at him. Now they're like, you're our leader. You will be enshrined in the temple here in whatever. And they're like, no, not really. I was getting ready to go get a bunch of gold and kill some people, and so I changed my mind. Or do they back a puppet? Do they become the one who pulls the strings from afar, or do they make a deal? And so you have to, as a GM, kind of plan out, okay, let me anticipate what each of those scenarios would look like, because I don't know when we actually get into the game which one they're going to pick. And I like that, because as we talk about all the time, giving them opportunities to make choices that influence the flow of the game in the world, that's what makes it feel real. And so you got to be ready for that. This prompts you, says, hey, think about at least these three options. I don't know if there's a fourth option, but think about these three.
Yeah. I'm just full of questions today. Okay. So
all right.
I have two more.
Full of answers. I'm full of something.
How do you guys see dealing with like lore that a PC should know but the player doesn't, kind of in those moments, like this is, I'm tying this in, so just the knowledge of the way that this organization would work, and obviously some of its backstory that hopefully has been built into things like that, but even just the way it works. Maybe a player sits down at the table and they're like, well, I don't know the complete hierarchy of this Perfumers Guild, and Ma Turner over here who wants to vie for power and all these things, like
Ma Turner,
Ma Turner, yeah,
perfumer, yeah.
She's the
smell the bayou.
Yeah. So have you guys dealt with that in a certain way, like other than just feeding it to people at the table? Like, I don't know what.
I think this is an excellent place, and maybe Sam was about to say this. I think this is an excellent place to use their knowledge rolls. But what you do is they've been in the guild before, so that hump that they have to get over, that number they have to get, is so low that you'll be like, but I would say, okay, make a knowledge roll here. And they roll and they're all expectant and hoping they pass. And you're like, oh yeah, you would know that, blah, 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 blah. Right. So that is still kind of feeding it. There may be other more creative ways to work that into story, but I think that's a fun way. I think students, I think players who may be students somewhere, players like to roll their skills and succeed. And so this is an opportunity to let them roll and succeed often. True. And even though it's a little bit like feeding them what that information is, then they begin to adapt to that and play that.
Right.
I could see a situation where, maybe you have time to just meet with that player one-on-one, and maybe you do a thing where, well, you've known the rules of the guild, but since you've been out, things have changed, and maybe you go on a little journey where they go around town and roll to talk to older associates and see if they can learn the new rules, or find out how protocols have shifted. That way, they're still learning and you're kind of feeding them, but it feels more rewarding. Not that the first one isn't, but.
Or kind of going off that, have a one-on-one with them, but instead of going around kind of slowly feeding them information, ask them questions. It's like, hey, there's been something, a change of power going on in the Perfumers Guild. What do you think that is?
Yeah.
When at a game, when they have time to think about it, and they're like, maybe this, and then so you are allowing them to kind of come up with it, and then you build off of what they come up with. They come up with 2 or 3 answers to your guided questions. You're kind of leading them, but you're not like telling them. Let them answer some questions, and then you pull that all together. And then game night, you're like, "Oh, Lawrence Fishburne. Lawrence Fishburne's a real guy. I shouldn't use that name." Now I can't think of any name.
Yeah.
Old Vinny took over, the cauldron mixing for the mint leaves, whatever they came up with, and you weave that in the story. So again, that's giving just one more level of kind of on a one-on-one, letting them guide the story.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, that's good, guys. Yeah. So I've got one more question that really has nothing to do with this encounter, but was sparked from this.
Let's do it.
So there's this thought in this. One of the options, is the PC decides I'm going to take power and become the leader of this guild, right? And I definitely think there's ways to do that. I think you can make that work, and then it becomes a complication if they continue adventuring. Like, I think there's definitely a way to do that. I don't know that like just hand waving. Yeah, you're the leader. I don't know. Like I think there's ways to make that work. But a question I have, and I don't know. I'm trying to think if I've ever really dealt with this. But the question is, if you have, like, what would it look like in your minds to have maybe a character that ceases to be in the adventuring party, player stays, but this is not a death-oriented leaving? Because I think my only experience, I'm trying to rack my brain a little bit, but the only experience I think I've ever had is they die. Yeah. So the player makes a new character that joins in eventually. I've never seen anybody just walk away. And like what that would look like.
That happen is if the player stays, is if they're hating their character. They're like, I hate this character. And they just come to you and are like, I really don't want to play this. And instead of killing them, you decide, hey, let's work together on how that character could be called to something else, and say, guys, I have to leave the party. And then we'll work on like your new character that you're going to write up, and we're going to bring him in. Yeah. But that would be, because I've had characters be like, I'm tired of this. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe we'll kill that character in battle somehow. But then that becomes almost feeling like you're pulling the hand of God on everybody, because you're like, I know, you don't like your character. Oh yeah, he loses the battle. He got hit so hard he's dead. Yeah. It's like, well, that's not as satisfying maybe as what.
And the party knows, you talk to the player and they say, I'm kind of tired of this character, and they're like, when's it going to happen?
Yeah. That could be a very, very cool way for them to even let that character exit, because then they have to like think of the story and write how they would react in this exit scene. That could be really cool. Yeah. You asked a question before that I was about to answer, and you asked a question, and then you added an addendum of that question. But what was the first question you asked there?
Like known lore, how to deal with known lore.
No. It was part of this last question you had. You said, I have one more question, and you kind of did 2.
I don't know.
Oh, I had an answer. I was ready, but then we went to the second part.
Non-death leaving. Yeah.
No, it was before the non-death leaving.
Being a part of the guild, choosing to be a part of the guild.
Oh yeah, if they choose to be part of the guild and decide to still play, you don't want to just hand wave it. But how would there be complications? The idea that I think it would be, if somebody's going to be the leader, they have to be accessible. And so there's some sort of way that this guild can communicate with them. And I think at some of the most inopportune moments, this guild is going to be like, hey, we have a problem back here with the ordering of the something, and we need your help. Or, hey, people are attacking this place. And, there can be complications, but there can also be boons from this. Yep. It's like you got a shipment of something that is now this sweet aroma that enhances and charms everyone, and they can, basically do the charm spell with some of the whatever. But they get some stuff, and they have some obligation. And sometimes at the most inopportune moment, people are in their ear when they're like, I'm trying to be quiet and think here. Leave me alone. And they're like, no, but we got a problem. Old Bill didn't come in today, and the thing's boiling over back here. It's like,
the perfume smells bad.
We picked a weird guild to go with.
I love
perfumers.
I love it.
We're thinking of new characters already.
I love the canon guild that we're dealing with is the Perfumers Guild with Old Bill, Ma Turner, and
Vinny. Oh, Vinny.
Vinny. Yeah. All right. Well, hey, that's an encounter that you guys can use as a starter. Again, it's way there's a strong ability to tailor that to what you want. Think of different guilds, definitely not the Perfumers Guild.
Yeah.
But think of whatever guild you would want and attach it to a PC that's in your party, because almost every party has some member that's like, I'm part of the Thieves Guild, or I'm part of the Wizards whatever academy, or you can find a way.
Guild,
yeah. So consider this. Consider that enemy who just hates your character and is either going to be dogging you or you got to do something about. So that's that.
Yeah.
Let's jump into our main topic of the day. That is Samuel Grant. Samuel Grant's our main topic. We're going to talk all about Samuel Grant. Now we're going to talk about him, but also about this Sentinels comic thing. And I'm going to kind of turn it over to Adam to introduce and to get this topic rolling. Adam?
Yeah. So Sam, again, thanks for being a part of this, and known you for quite a while now and played a lot of games together, and was really excited about, having you come on, talk about some specific games and specific ideas also. And, today looking at the Sentinels Comics RPG, we've referenced it a lot. Like, I feel like that comes up for me a lot, and is one of my favorite games right now to be a player in. But before we kind of dig into that, I did want to ask, you just kind of started to introduce yourself, but how'd you get connected into gaming? What was the path like to go into GMing?
Sure.
What does all that kind of look like as you went through the process?
Yeah. So, coincidentally, my path to gaming started with a game of the Sentinel Comics card game years ago, before I was even in college. And I was like, this is great. And then I got into it during college, started playing the game, the card game.
Let me ask you, who did you play with that first game? Who was that? People you knew before, or was Adam involved in that?
It was at CSF, yeah. So for some weird reason, I was with a group that was going to just hang out there, and they were playing Sentinels and having potato soup. So it was a good time.
What a combo.
It was, yeah.
Good. Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, no, it was awesome. Good food, good game. But so I played that in college, and then end of my freshman year, a guy I knew was like, "Hey, I'm starting a D&D group. Do you want to join?" I was like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" Always heard of it. So we'd play Saturday mornings and get up real early and play at the campus house, and that was really great. It's my first kind of D&D experience.
That is so different than most RPG groups. Meeting in a morning.
It was my fault because I worked, and I did not know this until recently. So I worked 4 to midnight, and that meant everyone else had to be on my schedule and play in the morning. So
they must have really wanted you in there.
They were very kind to have me in. It was great. I did that for a couple of years, and in between I'd play, smaller Pathfinder games or Red Market games with Adam. And then eventually, Sentinels, the card game, Greater Than Games, was like, well, we're doing an RPG. And I tried it out on their starter kit, and I was like, this is great. So backed it. And then I still do remember that very first session that was really rough around the edges. First GMing session. We played a module, and there weren't tokens or anything. So for every single enemy that came out, I was writing down on flashcards and putting them out, and everyone was very patient with me. But no, it was good. So after that, I started doing a lot of one-shots. I've never actually done a full Sentinel Comics campaign, but I like to do one-shots. I've got a campaign up here kind of written out. But yeah, I like, you can get into this, but I do like the RPG because it's so versatile. And there's just a lot you can do. Not that fantasy has limits, but you find yourself telling different stories in a good way when you get into superhero stuff or modern age stuff. Everyone.
Okay, so you've kind of mentioned superheroes, but a lot of people out there don't know what
Sentinels
Comics RPG is. So talk about what it is and how you do it.
Yeah. So this is a very visual thing, but here's a core rule book.
Those of you listening to the podcast, he held up the core rule book.
This core rule book. No, so the Sentinel Comics RPG is a superhero RPG where It has a world built for you, and you can learn all about that lore if you want, but you can also disregard it. You can pretty much create any hero that you want to make. I like their character building system. It's pretty flexible. But the whole game system is on what we call a dice pool. So depending on what you're doing, you're getting 3 dice together, rolling them all, and then taking usually the middle number or the mid die. Sometimes you'll do the minimum or the maximum depending on your ability or if you're not doing so hot. But it's a lot of fun because there's a lot of versatility, and not only in combat, but also in the situation that's going on around you. You know, we have this factor called the environment, in which the world around you is actively trying to either hurt or help you, just like the card game. And oftentimes that leads to a lot of tough decisions that your players or your heroes have to make. You know, do I punch the bad guy, or should I really go save that kitten in the tree? You know, there's some weighty moral stuff that can be a lot of fun, especially
is that
for the
an
DM.
option? I'm always punching.
No. Well, I did have a player throw a school bus full of kids like way up into the air on accident as a twist.
This is what you can do as a superhero.
This is what you can do as a superhero. Yeah. Yeah. No. So there's also a function in the game called twists, which are, hey, if you don't roll so hot, but you still want to succeed, you can do so with a complication. And in that case, they had stopped the school bus, but then shot it up into the air as their complication. So, yeah.
It's a great system. I really like the twist system in that.
Yeah. And they get to help come up with the twist, right?
Absolutely.
And so then that complication persists. I want to go back for just a moment. You kind of touched on the idea that you can kind of make up powers. Is there like guidelines and limits on powers? Or can they say, well, I'm invincible, I'm all powerful, and I'm all knowing?
I can't die. I'm really boring. No. There are some limitations. You know, usually you can be, you know, jack of all trades, master of none if you want, but you get bad dice to roll with. You know, you don't do so hot, or you can really pull yourself. There's a dog barking. Sorry about that.
He agrees with everything you're saying.
Yeah, she does. She does. No, you can pull your resources into one skill. You know, I've had guys who are all robotics, you know, or other things, and so you can make up pretty much any power, but you are kind of limited to a couple different ones, unless you kind of want to go crazy and be really weak.
Yeah, let's just for audience sake, list some samples of powers you've seen.
Yeah, sure thing. So, I mean, my brother made a hero that was a bodybuilder who was very strong and did some other stuff with like bodybuilding oil and would slip around and do stuff. That was pretty wild. That was on the more creative side.
Yeah, it was.
As far as more
impressive.
As far as more basic heroes, you know, I've had guys who do like time traveling, like sword people, you know, samurais or things like that. I've had different, like Adam made a character one time that was a giant rock guy who would defend things. So, you know, you get a lot of guys with the basic physical powers or the powers like elements, you know, fire, ice, things like that, or controlling nature, environments, shape-shifting. So basically any superhero you can think of, you can probably do it within the Sentinel system.
Yeah, it is fun as, you know, part of when you're making a D&D character, you're thinking, who would I be as a fantasy person? And you're kind of looking at their rule system. But there's something different about, if I could be a superhero, what would it look like? What kinds of things would I want to do? And then your imagination kind of goes in a very different direction, and it's fun.
Yeah. So Sam, we've kind of hit on it a little bit, but one of the things I wanted you to talk into a little more was because you've played in different systems and ran in different systems, like the big mechanical differences. So, you know, a lot of us are probably coming into this knowing like a D20 system.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned the dice pool kind of stuff, but if you could just kind of make some comparisons, some contrasts there between like
Absolutely.
a D20 system and that too.
Yeah. So, you know, in a D20 system, most, if not all of your rolls, especially in checks, are going to be with the D20 or 20-sided die. And then depending on your weapon, you might use a 6-sided die to attack or a 10-sided die or etc. So there's usually one die you're rolling at a time, unless you've got a super ability or a fireball that you're casting. Whereas with the Sentinels system, you're probably going to have a group of 3 or 4 dice that are going to be your mainstays, a 10-sided die, an 8-sided die, another 10-sided die, and then you create this pool of 3 dice that you're going to end up using depending on each roll, or whenever you roll. So each roll is going to be a different type of pool that you're creating. So, if you were to play the Sentinel Comics RPG, I'd recommend having, your standard dice set with you, so that you could pick up and grab, okay, now I need a D6, a D12, and a D4. Okay, roll them all. Right. Next turn, I might need 2 D10s and a D8. You just never know. And if you've got a great DM, they'll have something there for you if you need extras or things like that.
And I think a cool thing about the RPGs, you start off with access to a certain number of powers and stuff, but then like when you get low in health, you pop up to another tier of powers, and I think there's a third one, right?
Yes, yeah. So there's 3 zones: green, yellow, and red. Yeah. Depending on whether your health is lower or whether the situation is more dire, which is shown in this scene tracker that we can talk about, you get access to more powers. As things get more dramatic, you get more powerful, or you have the ability to do more powers. Think of any superhero movie where at the last minute, Superman does this new technique, or
he flies around the world and reverses
time. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, that would be a red ability.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that you're talking about the pool, the dice pool. The just to throw some terms out there. There's powers, qualities, and then status is what you're making your pool out of, right? So your powers are things like strength or lightning, teleportation, those kind of things, right? And qualities are maybe like leadership or would close combat be a quality?
That'd be more of a
power.
Okay. Yeah, it could. Depends. But like investigation or criminal knowledge, stuff
awareness,
like that.
Things like that. And then your status, like you were talking about, is that they call it gyro, green, yellow, red, out, right?
Yep.
Which comes from the card game. But I love that thing because a lot of times when I'm explaining the game to people, it's like, tell me, or when we're in the game, it's like, okay, tell me what you want to do. Now let's justify it with the dice kind of thing.
Yes.
And I really like that about that game because it does give some variation to, what you want to do. So it's like, if I'm the big, strong, Supermanish type person and I want to punch the creature as hard as I can, and be like, okay, I want to just hit this thing as hard as possible with a giant uppercut and send it into the stratosphere. And it's like, okay, we're going to grab power of close combat. And, I can't remember all of
super strength
close combat. And I'm in the yellow zone because I've taken some damage. Now I'm going to roll my dice to do that. I love the urgency thing too. And, maybe Sam, if you want to speak into that some about even like the scene tracker, that's a different kind of thing than what we would experience in like a D&D game.
Yeah, so the best comparison I can make to anyone who's familiar with D&D or has listened to the podcast is that die you've talked about where you'll flip it and things get more intense. People get more to their attack roll. In Sentinels, we have what's called the scene tracker, which after every round and each player and enemy and environment has taken their turn, you tick off a box. Some of those boxes are green, yellow, and red. And so as you're ticking boxes off, you're ratcheting up tension as the DM or the GM. You might be throwing in more threats, or you might be giving them dilemmas like, well, if you don't do, you can fight the bad guys, but the mayor's daughter is about to die, so I hope you go save her, And they also make the twists or the consequences of failed or bad rolls a lot more intense. Things get more difficult the longer the scene goes on, generally. So it's a good way to vary the combat. You know, when we're so used to, all right, I go up and I hit this thing, it's like, oh man, I could hit this thing, or oh, I also really got to save that kid, or whatever's going on. And it kind of adds another dimension to combat and just play.
And I love the fact that when there's a twist, the complication can really lead to the rest of the playing out the role of your character, because now they have this thing that they have to deal with in some sense for the rest of the game, possibly. But it can be a really fun thing. I mean, even though it's bad sometimes.
Yeah.
It's fun to create with the player. You know, a lot of times I'll have one, but I love when a player's like, oh, I know exactly what's going to happen. I tried to do this, and then this other thing happens, you know, or this guy comes in or whatever, you know, and that's a lot of, I think that system offers a really unique way to create with your players in a way that I think is really cool to invite them in, and they get excitement out of that, which is great.
Yeah. I find the storytelling in that game actually comes better when you fail.
Yeah.
Also, you know, it's like that's one of those we talk about, you know,
that might be true in every kind of role-playing game.
Yeah. I think. Sometimes
stories,
it's like crit one. It's like, you know.
Yeah.
Like, so that is a thing where, you know, and this, I think for you guys, like hearing from you too, but I love some of these. I think every RPG has taught me something that I like to bring into my more traditional fantasy. And you can't like always just tear out a rule. You know, it's like, this is not made, like, some of these rules are not made for that, but I think some of the principles of like the scene tracker, you know, the urgency of a scene, like I think that can come into a D&D situation where there's an encounter and it's like this building's about to collapse. There is an actual time frame for you to deal with this, and if you don't, then it's going to collapse, you know, and like people are going to die, or you're going to die, or whatever. I really like even like the environment. The way that functions. The environment is a great mechanic, and I think maybe one way to think about it, maybe like a layer action for D&D 5e for like things that have layers. But even like, what does that look like in other places? I probably use that idea the most in a D&D or a Pathfinder game, where it's like, well, if you check out the module that we posted, you know, like at the very end, there's spoiler, there's a, you know, there's things that go off at certain times. So it's like at initiative 20, this thing fires a bunch of magic missiles at everybody, you know, or this portal opens up and spits something out, or, you know, whatever that looks like, kind of things. So I like to use that a lot. And it's obviously not like every single encounter that I ever have is going to have something like that, but that's definitely something I've like torn out of that game and been like, how can I interpose this onto a game that doesn't typically have that? So it's a good one.
Absolutely.
I like the idea. And I was just thinking about this. I was looking up stuff as you were talking, because one thing that I think is unique about this, and it's very unique to that kind of comic book genre, is that you play issues. Instead of encounters, you have an issue, right? And it's like a small comic book. Yeah. And
it's another issue. Sorry, visual media.
Yeah, he's holding up one of those issues.
Be sure to check us out on YouTube.
It's cool because it puts you into that thinking of when you were a kid and you would read an issue of Spider-Man or Batman or Superman or whatever it is, and you would go through and they would have their villains, and then they would tie that up, and then you would have another issue, and then they have there's like so many issues become
an arc.
An arc.
Oh, I'm just thinking in general, but in the game, a collection.
A collection,
yes.
Right? And then, like, I guess if you're running a campaign, you said you've never run a campaign, that would be multiple collections put together.
And when you finish a collection, you allow your players to name that collection. And then the other nice thing about collections is, let's say we go on to another one. A character can reach back and say, retcon things, just one. Well, actually, I recall this from my collection, you know, while we were doing this, I actually learned about this skill, you know, or you go back to those older sessions and your players can say, well, when we were in the ancient ruins, you know, I learned a little bit more about magic, you know, or, you know, whatever. And so that allows players to add more to their stories and participate in that fun storytelling stuff.
What I was thinking about is Adam was just talking about like, I love how in some games you can rip some stuff out and put it into your classical D&D. And I was thinking about this idea of issues and like them coming up. And so I used to DM, and I'm just crazy like this, but in my own head, I wanted to name those sessions because I just liked them. So when we're playing the Dormant Mind, I'd have one called Close Encounters of the Centaur Kind, because I knew in this one they were going to run into a bunch of centaurs. Or Wag the Tongue Bandit, and it was because I knew that they were going to, at the bottom of this pit, end up capturing a bandit and trying to make him talk. Whether he did or not was inconsequential. Or the Woodsman Revenge, or the Noble's Lair, or Down by the Old Mill Stream of Death, because I knew they were going to be, fighting on this stream. So I named all these. But what you could do is these places, that they will likely be. You can have like this book they find, and it just has these things in it, and it's like the Old Mill Stream of Death, and they have no idea what that means. And then they end up by a stream and they fight a bunch of zombies while they're there, which is what happened with these characters. And then they can look back and be like, oh my goodness, we just did the Old Mill Stream of Death. So check that off. It's like somehow they have to do these things, but they're just these very cryptic titles. And it's kind of like having issues, but they kind of discover them along the way, and they don't recognize until they're done with them, hey, that's one of the things in this book that we found, and that could be cool, at least for me.
That'd be interesting, because the question as a player, I would be like, wait, what happens when we check all these off? Like, kind of thing is like, what is this?
And you don't
thing,
know,
or is this a bad thing?
And then
who's predicting our future here?
Yeah.
And maybe there's, they find more books and with more titles in it. That's the, what did you call them when you have several issues?
Oh, collection.
A collection. It's like they have another collection of, oh my goodness, we found more of these. And then they start getting the sense that these are going to be things we encounter. So then they're looking all over for whatever they can decipher them to be. And
one of them is just the death of whatever PC.
The death of all PCs is one of them. And they're like, oh.
TPK.
Yeah.
So a question I have, Sam, for your how you understand this and would explain this, is this question of how, I think it's a comic book question sometimes, but it's how can Superman, nigh invulnerable, superpowered, exist in the same, or maybe stand in the same combat as someone like, I don't know, even a good I was going to say Batman, who's like a moral person, skilled, wealthy, but like doesn't necessarily have no superpowers, right? How do they, in this game, like in your experience, like how do you have someone who maybe even is like, I'm just a private investigator who happens to be able to shoot a gun, and then you have
down on my luck,
Mr. Incredible over here, like who's like doing things. We're not really using actual
sure, but ideas of those characters.
Yeah.
One thing I think that helps me is to return to that idea of spotlight that you guys talk a lot about.
Right.
And I think coming up with situations for your PCs where, it's really great that Superman has all the super strength, but we're not going to be able to move forward if we don't have Detective Guy, and his trusty gun, or whatever, or his investigation skills.
Right.
So I think leaning into that not only helps to shift that power imbalance, but also can reward those players, and help them to feel like they're a part of the world.
Yeah.
So
do you feel like mechanically that works pretty well?
I do think so. Every player in that game is really tailored to being good at their thing, but I also feel like, sorry, dog's doing something, losing my train of thought. I feel like it works pretty well because, you are still limited to one turn. There is still just one thing you can do. And that mechanical constraint does so much, even for those weird imbalances. You can be god of the 9 planes, and you still gotta wait, until you can your next turn to do something. So I think that more than anything definitely helps to limit those imbalances.
Yeah. I think like from my experience, that dice pool even is a thing that like, even if you have massive D12 punch available to you, there's still the situation where, well, I may have rolled all ones on that punch and totally whiffed, kind of
absolutely.
thing. So,
or the humbling thing is that the Mr. Incredible goes to, investigate, and he's like, man, I don't have that ability, so I guess I'm rolling a D4,
Yeah, that's
and
true.
that humbles a lot of players in a
Yeah.
good way,
Yeah. Yeah.
So I know about the Sentinels card game, which is what I had experience with first. The cool thing about that is everybody playing is cooperating, which is like an RPG game. And the environment is kind of acting by the flip of a card, and you don't know whether it would be good or bad. It's kind of random. And I think that randomness is held in the RPG. But the big difference is that the enemy plays itself. The cards kind of come out and things come out, and it just automatically determines. But in the role-playing game, you still have to play and kind of decide how the enemy is going to be deployed, right?
And that's something for me as a DM that's tough. I'm the kind of guy I kind of like to pull my punches. So when I do especially in the environment, I usually roll, odd or even. Is it going to attack? Or attack the players or attack the enemies or both, so I try to leave that up to chance as much as possible. But then and the same thing with the villains, I've got 5 guys wailing on this one character, and it's like, oh man, maybe I'm gonna roll and see if they decide to hit someone else. I try to make it, and maybe I'm showing my hand too much. I try not to make it too bad, but sometimes that does happen. So you do have to make those decisions.
It's funny because both of you guys have made the comment that you kind of find yourself trying to pull punches, and I'm the opposite. Yeah. I'm like, how can I hurt him?
I will say,
a mean GM.
I will say, very recently, Sam was GMing a SCRPG game that I was playing in, and I believe that I lost like 2/3 of my health in one hit from a guy. So
you did.
I don't know how.
Yeah, that's true.
The difference is I would have done another hit like that.
Yeah, and I said, well, I think he's going to aim for someone else.
It became very urgent very quickly for me.
It did. Yeah, but that was a rough one.
That I think one thing, like if I could speak into that, like they do a good job of one. I think if it's like a specific using terms here, so they have like minions and they have lieutenants and they have villains, and minions are your kind of, they're the goblin raiders of the and whatever they are, whether they're little soldiers or robots or aliens or whatever, that's like you punch them once and there's a good chance they're going to go down kind of thing. Lieutenants are a little bit heftier. There's mechanics that go with all these, but I don't feel like we need to go into that. And then villains are more of your typical, they have HP, but they also do a lot more stuff. And I feel like all of those, especially if you're working out of the book or something that they've published, they do talk tactics a little bit with those things. And you do have some options of like, this Blade Battalion guard does either this or this, kind of thing. So even though it's not playing itself, I do feel like they, there is that question of like, who do they attack and exactly what do they do? But that helps me when I've played those games of like, okay, I have a better sense of the tactics and like, it's not just, okay, what off the top of my head, what are they going to do kind of thing. So I do like that about that.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
That's right.
That's one thing, especially when you are homebrewing anything or making your own stuff. If you make minions, you're supposed to make an ability, a thing they can do. Maybe they get +1 to saving throws or whatever, but also that tactic, and that really forces you to think, okay, what would this guy do? I've got this biker who is very vain, and he's going to attack the strongest guy because he's very cocky or whatever. And so putting that requirement of that philosophy of why are they doing what they're doing really can take that pressure off of you, and also allows you to really get into that creative aspect in the mind of your minions or your creatures.
One thing I will mention for all of you out there who have never played Sentinel stuff, when I first started playing Sentinel's card game, and it's kind of a little bit the same with the RPG, these guys had this podcast what was it? The letters page. The letters page. And they would talk about the backstory of all their characters. And they'd say, well, back in issue 7, this happened. And then in issue 10. And I kept thinking, where in the world are these comics? I can't find any of these comics. And it's because they were just pretending that they had written all these comics, and none of them were actually there.
Yeah.
I was so confused for so long, but they have a very, very detailed and interesting backstory to all their heroes and the way they interact and how they came to be. And it's very interesting. So sometimes we like to plug other podcasts. I would say, and I don't know because I haven't listened to nearly as much as probably these two guys, but the very first season or the first so many episodes of Letters Page was really, really good. And I think toward the end they started getting not as good, but I would highly suggest go listen to the beginnings of that Letters Page and like when they were going through the heroes and stuff.
Yeah. They're still going. I don't know if you knew that, Matthew. They're like still putting out episodes. I think there was like if you think about like, so the Avengers movies, they kind of all ramped up to Endgame, and then it's like a finding of your way again right now.
That
like
phase 4.
I feel like there was a little bit of that where they kind of came to a climax of the story and then needed to figure out where they're at. And they're also
the Oblivion event.
Yeah, Oblivion. And then they're also like developing games and things. So what's that?
Oblivion, yeah.
Oh.
Oblivion, not Oblivion.
That's all right.
But yeah, they're putting out a lot of their stuff right now is actually is issues, are issues, or even like multi-issues. That's like the podcast they put out is just telling those stories right now. And it's been pretty cool lately to see them even fill in those like fake comics, and they're like straight up like, yeah, these don't exist. We're just making them up.
But it's still really, how long are those episodes typically?
Probably an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Okay. I started to say, I remember they were really long, but then I remember we're doing an hour and a half pretty much.
Right. Yeah.
I'm like, okay, maybe we're too long. Hey, let us know at one of our socials if you feel like we're too long or too short, because I don't know it's going to change anything, but we want to know.
Yeah.
A lot of them are like hour and a half ish.
I think the longest was like 2:43.
What's that?
Yeah.
The longest one I listened to was like 2 hours and 45 minutes.
That was a big one.
That was anyway, we don't need to get into it.
These things were always great. When I had to mow the yard, I'd put headphones in and I'd start mowing and I'd listen to an episode, and then I would like continue listening after I was done mowing the yard because it was that long.
Well, I think one other thing, just while we're on the podcast, is even if you're like, man, I don't even know who they're talking about, I don't know these heroes, what's going on.
Nobody does.
Yeah, nobody does. But also, I'd recommend listening to a writer's room episode where they get together and they just say, I don't know what we're doing, but we're going to create a nemesis for this guy, or backstory for this character. And I think that's a good thing to watch or listen to creatively. If you're like, how do people come together? It can be inspiring or helpful.
Yeah, I do. I think no matter what, whether you're like, I want to run this like Sentinels Comics RPG, or even I'm going to stick with D&D, I'm going to stick with Pathfinder. Like, I do agree, Sam, that's like a really good just process. I think it's some of the stuff we're doing here with these encounters. It's that kind of thing on a level of telling the story about this person. And I think that's a good way to like think about, how do I want to make a villain, or NPCs that are important in this or that. It's like, it's a different way of looking at it. So definitely very good.
I think these guys, they're just at heart, they love telling stories. And I think that's where the card game came from. That's where the RPG came from. And that's why they have all these like backstories and history and like these very intricate tied togethers between all of the villains and the heroes and the heroes past. And it's like, they just love telling stories. And that's what that's what gaming's about, is telling stories. And they're all about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Sam, for you, I know you've listened to our stuff here leading up. We talked about like 8 types of fun at one point and kind of walked through those. Also, we talked about for, several episodes, we were talking about like the entertainer and the storyteller and the facilitator. For you, like, where do those things kind of lie, as far as your like GMing time and things like that?
Yeah. So I'll need to look up 8 types of fun again real quick. Yeah, Gnomes 2. There we go. While I'm pulling that up, though, as far as entertainer, facilitator, things like that, as a GM, I find myself being a mix of all 3. I think entertainer for the most part. Like you, Adam, I really like to put together those playlists and just get all the music ready, and get everything good like that. One thing, and I don't know why I do it, but when I GM, a lot of times when I'm telling or describing how things happen, I'll get up and I'll act it out, or I'll do that. It's weird, but I'll be like, oh, well, yeah, you get up and you kick the guy like this, or you slash him like that, and so I think trying to draw that visual mental picture is something I really like.
Yeah.
So definitely entertainer. But I do also like facilitating, a nice time and just getting people to enjoy that storytelling together in collaboration.
Yeah, sure.
As far as 8 types of fun go, man, I would definitely say narrative and discovery can be really good for me. I do like telling a good story together, but also the process of what's that over there? There's something in the distance that a GM just told me about, and I want to go there, or I want to do that. And so I think for me, those are 2 really big things. But then after that fellowship could be really, really nice just to be around people, and just kind of share entertainment is really good. So I'd definitely say narrative, fellowship, and exploration for me.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Hey, Sam, we are so thankful you came on and kind of talked about this idea of the Sentinels Comic RPG, because so many of our people probably have a fantasy background and have not kind of branched into some of these others. And we're going to bring up others as we go through this podcast, and we always love having guests on. But we're gonna end today with our NPC that we always have. This generic NPC you can drop into your campaign if you're looking for characters, and Adam's going to read that, and then we're going to talk about it.
Yeah. So this is Amina Fawneye, again, from the Masks book that we've been working through, The Social Chameleon. Her appearance, her large, innocent-looking eyes project integrity and honesty. As far as role-playing, she will say or do whatever it takes to build trust with her target. Her personality is that she doesn't care for others, though. Even though these things are kind of outwardly happening, she doesn't have any care for them. They exist to be manipulated in her mind. Her motivation is that she gets her thrills from both a successful theft. So we found out that she is actually a thief. And she gets her thrills from the pretty baubles that are her reward. As far as her background is, she was born into a moderately wealthy merchant family. Amina always appreciated the pretty trinkets that her father brought home from his travels. When her father's return trips became less and less frequent and the flow of gifts halted altogether, Amina decided to steal them for herself. When she was caught trying to steal from one of her father's clients, which was a scandal that nearly destroyed the family business, she was disowned, and she's been working the streets ever since. She's quite stealthy, competent with traps and locks, but her real talent is her social grace. A natural chameleon, she's able to blend into nearly any situation and expertly manipulate others. She could go far in politics or espionage or business, but Amina doesn't want success or money. She's content with her modest lifestyle, but occasionally will fixate on one piece of jewelry and use her considerable abilities to take it. Afraid that selling her trophies will get her caught, she either melts them down or keeps them well hidden. She only wears them in private. So Amina Fawneye. And the quote is, that necklace she wears, see how beautifully it catches the light? It will be mine. That's like her thought process there. So Amina Fawneye.
I like Amina Fawneye for a reason. So many of the characters that we have been reading, it kind of tends to lead you to the place of this is going to become an encounter. This is going to become like somebody you're going to have to defeat or maneuver or whatever. Hers is just, it's a character. And yes, she has a flaw. She likes to steal a little bit, but which of our PCs don't? Which of our PCs don't want to take whatever they see that they like? So you got this woman who can really just be an NPC without becoming a big encounter. But I love the fact that you're gonna see her in taverns, or you're gonna see her at like social events or balls and stuff. And it seems like what's cool, I would think, with this character is that maybe your characters, they go to to different things and they encounter her at different places. They encounter her in this kind of a baudy bar, and she's like kind of up there and just life of the party, and seems to really blend in. And you notice she has this nice this earrings, or this big ruby, like a gypsy might have. And then later they're at this like really formal social event, and they see her walking by with an umbrella, and she's got these really nice string of pearls around her neck. And you always want to kind of add in a jewelry bit, since that's her thing. But they're kind of confused, because no matter where she's at, she seems to totally fit in and totally be part of that. But they recognize, wait a minute, this is that same girl who looked like a gypsy and who was having so much fun in the bar with everybody. Everybody was having just joyous celebration. And now we see her over here walking with these prim, women and high social status, playing croquet or whatever they're doing over there. And wait, now she's here. I find her in the commerce district, and she's got a cart, and you notice her by that nice, those nice bracelets she had, whatever. But that social chameleon idea is what I would really play up. And I would not tell my characters it's the same person. I would just kind of describe, and then I would like maybe give them one clue that would always that might begin to clue, wait a minute, this is that same girl. And if they discover that on their own, that's beauty for me.
Yeah.
And so I like this kind of character, because it doesn't have to have a big thing tied to it. You can just like sprinkle her throughout, especially if they're in the same area for a while, or they're in that area, they go somewhere else, they come back through that area, and in different situations. Okay, one night there's a circus going on. Oh, and they stop to see, and all of a sudden they're like, hey, that girl up on the trapeze, don't we know her?
Brooch is, really nice. Yeah,
it's just it'd be fun, and there never has to be a big consequence from it. She doesn't have to be like the one who tells them the secrets of the campaign and everything that leads them to. She can just be this person that they just kind of continue to encounter.
Right.
I like that.
Yeah. I really do like that idea of them seeing her in different places. Honestly, I always want, like, particularly when I play like a bard or a rogue, that's what I want to be every time. So I'm like very like, yes, I love that, because that's always like, oh yeah, I have a disguise that I put on, and and it never works as well as that. But I like that idea a ton, of like all these different things you keep running into this person playing a role. That is really cool.
And they begin to question, who is she really?
It's funny, because I actually, just reading over this myself, I kind of saw her in a different role, which I don't think I'd want to play up, like you said. I wouldn't want to make her the main thing, but I could see her as someone who just really frustrates your party's rogue, or anyone who's trying to steal something. It's not that she needs the money
every time.
Beats him to the punch, or her. It's not that she needs the money; it's that she wants the shiny thing. And what's frustrating is she can do it better, and she doesn't really have a noble reason, like for the Thieves Guild, or for some coin. It's just, I like it, and so I could see that being a very frustrating character who shows up and
that'd be fun.
Just shows off.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking, I had an idea of that, because Matthew, you're Oracle of Order.
Yep.
That Huntsman. That happened to us very early on, maybe like session 2 or something, 1 or 2, where we were trying to get this thing, and we go to get it, and there's just a note that's left, and he's taken it, and we're like, that like drove us forward, and it's like, whoever this guy is, like, and I remember that, like, that's like a memory, for me, of that exact moment of like,
because you solved all kinds of puzzles and went through this mansion of like mansion of like homicide. Difficulties. When you got there at the end, it's just like, hey, I hope you don't mind, I borrowed this. See you in another life, brother. I kind of modeled him off of who was that guy from Lost, the Australian guy. See you in another life, brother. I used to say that all the time with him. So he would leave that note, and they would find it like occasionally, and they're like, dang it, Huntman.
Yeah.
One step ahead of you.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are, and this is again an example of there's two very different ways to play this little NPC. How do you imagine him? Do you imagine him as the one who's constantly frustrating your rogue and kind of a step ahead, but you can't figure out how to like foil them, or this person that's everywhere and just like begins to become this mystery of how is she like in every circle and everywhere they go, she's there, and it doesn't have to be any more than, you know, so it's like, and there may be a third way that you're thinking of that is just as valid. And so, yeah, you take that and you drop it in. I like this one because I feel like it's easier to drop in without kind of disrupting what your characters were already about to do. Because if they come across some guy who's like doing something evil, then they're like, whoa, 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 we got to stop this guy. And that becomes like a thing. You know?
So Sam, since we're here, you know, earlier talking about the Sentinels Comics RPG, to put you on the spot, does this person bring anyone to mind within the Sentinels Comics RPG?
You could say Ermine.
If you want.
Yeah.
So to make a little twist here, you know, because this is very Ermine's character, right?
Yeah.
Which I did not. This is another one of those like I didn't realize this, but this triggered this for me. So let's go back to the SCRPG for a minute. How would you use Ermine, which is a very similar character, thief, just wanting it for the thrill, just to get something pretty, you know, in that game? How would you use that?
Yeah, you know, I think one way I could see that being used is Ermine being someone who takes valuable things that cause a lot of problems for the heroes. You know, they're going to be presented with the key to the city, and on their big day, she goes and steals the biggest diamond. You know, or
I thought you were going to say the key.
Or the key, yeah.
They get to the ceremony and they open the box and they're like,
there's
anybody know where the key is?
Yeah, needed to open something, you know. Or, you know, they're trying to get into this facility with research and, I don't know, steal some certain formula or some symbiotic thing. And she's already got there and she took it, you know, she doesn't need it, but she just frustrates them, you know. So I think that it's not only just for a frustrating thing, but also something that could cause complications. Like, well, now she has this thing that was supposed to be in the hands of this other villain or us, you know. How do we all three negotiate this as these parties, you know?
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I think about, so the game I'm running now, again, it's kind of shifted away, but starting in the Thieves Guild, I could even see someone like this. Again, I would never think of this as like a battle situation. I don't think Ermine, or I don't think
Amina.
Amina, that she's gonna like engage that way. But I like that idea of even like the Thieves Guild being like, someone is doing all our hits. Like every time we have a job, where people show up, and this, like, that even being a kind of motivating factor of, we got to figure out who this is. And now we have to either parlay with them, or like, how do we, you know, deal with this as far as someone who's not like hostile as in like a violent kind of way. So I think that'd be a cool way, but I'm going to stick with that idea of what Matthew laid of just, you keep seeing this person in all these different ways. And that's really good. It's really good.
Not to get too far into it, but I would love, you know, a situation where they're trying to get into this party and she's there, you know, like, how is she here? But we're not on the list, you know.
She just winks and walks away.
So, yeah.
That's great. That's cool.
Well, Sam, we are so glad that you came on the show. We love having guests, and it is there's something, again, it's about that kind of creative building together. And even here in this little 3-person panel, we get to do that. And we really enjoyed that. So thank you for coming on, and thank you for explaining the Sentinels Comics stuff. Adam, what are we talking about next time?
So we're going to be kind of changing gears a little bit. We were talking about, you know, GM inspirations prior to this. And we're going to go into a little arc of planning and talking about a little deeper how we do planning. And we're going to start with kind of big, what's a campaign planning kind of look like for each of us. And then we're going to, on the next episode, go into, all right, what's this, an arc, like, if we think in terms of arcs of the campaign, are we planning those in any certain way differently? And then even going a little bit more micro into, all right, what's a session look like? How do we sit down and say, all right, I'm ready to plan this session, kind of thing. So the next 3 are going to look into like planning and hopefully give some tips or some insight, or maybe like, I never want to do it that way. Whatever that is, just helping people along as how to kind of go about those things. So, yeah.
All right. So you guys, you don't want to miss that. Be with us next time as we begin that 3-session arc. Again, we're thankful that Sam could join us today. And don't forget, if you have questions, we didn't have anything in the haversack. I reached in and it was empty today, but you can send a question to riseofthegm@gmail.com. You can follow us on all of our socials, on Instagram, on X, whatever it is, Rise of the GM. Don't forget, next time we're going to start this planning process. So thank you again for joining us here on Rise of the GM.
Thanks, everyone.